Infrastructure Services and Networks Committee meeting. Okay, into the meeting proper. I've got to note apologies from Mayor and Councillor Staines. I'll move those to be accepted. Seconded, Councillor Benson Pope. Any discussion? All in favour, please say aye. Right, against, carried. Thank you. Confirmation of the agenda.
Just on that matter, I'm wondering if there's any reason why we couldn't elevate item 10 so that the people at the forum can...
I think they've left anyway. I know that one has got another
they're
meeting.
They're not interested, okay.
Well, I think they're interested, but the one I know has another meeting.
Ignore that.
Thank you for your consideration. I'll move that the committee confirms the agenda with the following alteration in regard to Standing Order 2.1, Option C be adopted in relation to moving and seconding and speaking to amendments. Thank you, Councillor Gary. Seconded it. Any discussion? All in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against, carried. Declaration of interest. I'll move that the... anyone want to... Oh, Councillor Hawkins.
Yeah, thank you. On behalf of two of my colleagues, I think it might be worthwhile at this point, given the outcome of the last council meeting, to add myself, Councillor Vandervers and Councillor Lord as members of the District Licensing Committee. I'd assumed that would be done automatically, but if that could be done, that would be helpful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have you another issue? That is it. Those declarations, you're all happy to have that added on, I presume. Noting that amendment, I'll move that the committee notes the amendment of the elected members' interest register attached as attachment A and amends the proposed management plan for elected members' interests. Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Hawkins. Any discussion? Councillor Vandervis.
You might also want to add my elevation to the Dunedin Symphony Orchestra as the
council appointment
candidate, but I'm not.
That was done at a recent council meeting as well. Thank you. Anyone else with any other matters that they wish to declare? I'll put that motion with those two amendments. Councillor Elder has seconded it. Any discussion? All in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against, carried. Thank you. Property Services Activity Report for the quarter ending 31st of March 2018. Are you speaking to this? Take it as read. Do you wish to say anything? Any questions?
Yeah, thank you. It's a question for Ms Graham, potentially just seeking advice as per the interest register. I chair an organisation that is a tenant of our council property. I'm happy to withdraw from this discussion noting that, but just a question of whether that's whether I'm overreacting in that regard, or any guidance would be helpful.
My guidance would be this is a report for noting only, and so I can't see a problem at this point, but depending on where the discussion goes and if things change, then you might want to reconsider that.
Or you may wish to not to ask questions on one particular aspect of the built property, would be the alternate way of dealing with that. Thank you. Councillor Lord.
Yeah, look, I've just got a couple of questions for Ms Mash. Page 19, items 22 and 23 is talking about some of the property that's come under our that we're looking after with the property department, and I'm just wondering about 48 School Street. Now, I'm not familiar with this area, but it says this is a community housing complex with 9 flats with various issues relating to moisture and access, and they're going to spend 1.8 million, and I work out that for 9 flats that's $200,000 each, and I'm just wondering, is that like basically a total rebuild, or is that just and also just the next one below, I see an upgrade there, 5 million, and I wondered how many units that is, because if there's less than 25 units, for example, that's also $200,000 per unit. And I'm just wondering, cost of rebuilding could be cheaper.
Yeah, so through the chair, the School Street one is, for all intents and purposes, a full rebuild of it. So to achieve cosy home status and improvements in those areas, rather than just a refurbishment of bits and pieces. It's a full rework of that site. Now, I'm not as clear on the Palmyra site. There's over 20 units, I think, from memory, but I can come back to you and take that as a question on notice.
And can I just ask, with that Palmyra site, exactly what they're doing? Is that
So that's the one I'm less clear on.
Oh, yeah.
So I'll come back to you with that detail.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Vanderbiss?
If you could perhaps email us all since I had those questions as well.
Yes, certainly. Thanks, Councillor.
In item 13 on page 17, sorry, it talks about occupancy rates being below target as some property is due for sale. Is the due for sale properties, are they properties that you can let us know which properties are due for sale, or is there some commercial sensitivity around that?
I don't believe there is, so I'll compile a list and I'll circulate that as well.
Okay, given that a long time ago when we started to develop Wall Street and made the decision on the basis that developing it would increase the sale value of the land that we owned there, and given that various calls to actually realise that value since then have not happened, are we now in a position where Wall Street is optimal for sale? Is it on the list, or is that something that's just going to carry on forever?
So with regards Wall Street, before we would look to move it to a point of sale, we need to reinstate our Manuka walkway. So that's a piece of work I've got my property team focusing on at the moment. So that needs to happen in the first instance, so we are compliant. And then once we've done that piece of work, we will move towards it being ready for sale.
Is one of the reasons that we are now heading in that direction that our previous property manager used to have to spend 50% of his time organising that particular property, as reported in a previous council agenda?
So that staff member is still with us, so they spent a percentage of their time working with Wall Street. So right now Wall Street has some of its building services outsourced, and we're just going through a proposed restructure process for our existing staff member there to, and that process is still in TRO, so that's a human resource process that's being undertaken at the moment. And then we will look at the majority of the Wall Street services being outsourced, and then that will have us in a position where management, external management will be in place, and we will have some parameters around that, around increasing return to council in the first instance, so that when it is put for sale it will be a more attractive proposition.
Okay, I'm interested to see yet another example, or hear another example of external management. We were told fairly recently that there's an extra 13 new staff going into property services, and yet we are farming out other things to external management. Can you explain what the extra 13 staff members are actually going to be doing, given that we are continuing to outsource?
So no, not straight off the top of my head, I can't explain. I've had some conversations with staff recently. So this was a structure that was put in place that I've inherited, and some of it's to do with around managing the 900 plus social housing portfolio that we'll continue to manage ourselves. Some of it is to do with our commercial leasing portfolio, and a number of positions are to do with facilities management. So really picking up our game and improving our efforts in those spaces take up the majority of extra staff.
Thank you. Is it possible for you to forward to me the job descriptions of the 13 new staff that are coming on board, so that we get some idea of what these staff increases are actually for?
Yeah, I would say no, off the top of my head, that's an operational issue that is managed by council staff. So I'm happy to give you, a breakdown of what the positions are, so you can have an understanding of them, and that can be achieved without a raft of job descriptions. So I'm happy to describe what the job is, what the facilities job is, what the leasing of job is, and make that available to you so you can improve your understanding.
And you can do this for the 13 new employees that we have in this department.
So I'm not in a position to know whether it's 13 or 12 or 8 or 9 having...
Well, we were told 13 in a previous agenda.
Okay. Whatever the number is, whatever the vacancies are, I will endeavour to summarise those for you with what the roles are and make that available to you.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Lord.
Sorry, I just have one other question and then I'm happy to move if you want me to. But on the bottom of page 19, in the next steps, it's working with Parks and Recreation on the handover of non-recreational property assets, and I was just wondering what some of those assets are, and are they bits of land that we own here and there? And
Yes, something I do know about. So there's 17 properties that have been identified that are currently sitting with Parks and Rec that actually serve no intrinsic purpose in the Parks and Recreational service delivery. So things like the Sims building at Port Chalmers, Chingford Stables, a raft of those kinds of ancillary buildings, they're the ones that have been earmarked to hand over to property.
so they won't, like obviously Chingford Stables is not going to be something that you sell. Will some of those properties be potentially saleable, just odds and sods that belong nowhere, or are they all a bit in that vein?
So the handover doesn't indicate any intention to sell or not sell. It's around facilities management of such, and a lot of them will be on reserve for community purpose, reserve for recreational purpose, which intrinsically makes them not a great prospect for any kind of sale. The only one that springs to mind at the moment that we're working on is Tomahawk School. So that's the one that's been discussion around what that site would be used for and what those school buildings would best be put to.
Thank you. Councillor Hawkins.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. A couple of questions. One around our social housing, or what do we call it, community housing portfolio. Do we know yet what the regulations are going to be for the Healthy Homes Guarantee Act and our role as landlord? I don't know if they've been set yet or not, or whether we have an opportunity to input into those as MB develop them. Do we know?
No, I don't know, but
Okay.
we can have an update.
Yeah, I'm just, the deadline's 2024, but it's hard to put together a works program to achieve that if you don't know what the goals are yet. And my second question is around paragraph 14, and maybe I've missed this in an earlier meeting, around Fisher and Paykel surrendering part of their premises in Wall Street. Is that's the bit that's in the Wall Street complex, not the bit that they expanded into the Penrose's building next door? So are they still in the...
They're still in the Penrose building, but this is the bit that's in Wall Street proper.
Okay. And so is that... I mean, that was sort of a bespoke arrangement for the purposes of that tenant. So is that being refitted to allow for occupancy of the Wall Street portion? I mean, is that remediated is probably the word I'm looking for, maybe. Or is it just being, has that just been left as is in the interim?
I don't know. I'll find out.
Thank you.
Councillor Elder.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Social housing question again. There is quite a large waiting list, I see, for social housing. Has this waiting list gotten longer over the last couple of years due to perceived housing pressure?
So,
that might be a tricky question.
Yeah,
for
my
you,
history
sure.
doesn't. My history in my
you
head
have
doesn't
been.
extend past 5 months. So that's been the number. That's been around about the number that's been constant in the time I've been here. There was comment previously, so it won't be hard to drag out those figures. So, what, 3 to 5 years? Is that the comparison you're looking for?
Yeah,
Yep.
just to see the change in
Yep.
the pressure on social housing.
Yeah, I'll grab that.
Thank you.
Councillor O'Malley.
I too have relates to that whole social housing question, and that the 942 houses, do we know what a percentage of the total houses of Dunedin that represents? No, so I'm not expecting the answer today. I'm thinking 3 years into the future, because I've just had the long-term plan, but as we're considering social housing in the city in the future, it'd be quite nice to know that number against other cities, especially in the context of the hospital rebuild and potentially some arguments around what we're going to do with housing those workers.
So just for clarity, can you say whether you're talking about social housing in the city owned by the DCC or other partners, or how our role compares to other cities? I'm not quite sure what you're asking for.
I've heard a figure that Wellington has as much as 13% of the housing stock in the city, in their city.
As social housing, by the council? Yeah,
well, that was just the mayor speaking at a conference. So, how accurate what that number really meant was. But I'm not asking for a massive staff report here, just an idea of really what that means against the total houses that are in the city. And as we are, we are looking like the task force in housing as to what are we going to do with all these workers coming in. Could we be thinking about something a bit higher? And that's just more to be caught up later.
Yeah, I just don't want a lot of work for
that's why I'm saying very high level, no reports, nothing like that. Yeah.
Sorry, we've got...
I just thought I might be able to help a little bit. Of our 950 odd, we have about 55,000 properties across the city. Around 2%, but the piece of work involved to look at social housing more broadly is just not something that we have on the work programme.
I'm not actually looking for a report.
Okay, but so they're the numbers?
Yeah,
so within Kui?
Around about 2%.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool, thanks.
Councillor Gary.
Thank you, Madam Chair. 2 questions. First one, just for clarification, on page 17, the difference between priority list 1 and 2, I presume, is that one is income and asset tested and one is not, and the second one is not?
That's correct, Councillor.
Thank you. And you talked about the handover of property to property from the Property Department from Parks and Reserve. Does that include the Portobello Domain building? Would you know that off the top of your head? And if not, could you just let me know?
I'll check. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Wiley.
Thank you. Starting with paragraph 17 on page 18, the maintenance management IT system, is that I understood there was a management IT system, is that the one that's being brought up to scale or brought up to speed? Or is it a different
yes,
system?
It is. No, it is.
Okay. Do we have a budget around what that was?
Not that I'm aware of.
Yeah. We can find out. It's within budget, so it's a planned piece of work.
Yeah, I just had an understanding that it was quite an expensive operation. But anyways, okay, the next question I've got is paragraph 19, seismic assessments. There are remaining 4 properties. Are you able to identify which 4 properties we're still waiting for reports? They were due mid-April.
No, I'm not.
Yeah, can you please forward that to us? So, Civic Centre Library, the roofing membrane. Is there any issues with the Civic Building roofing membrane?
Apart from this connector bridge here, which was worked on about 3 weeks ago, there was a ceiling leak there. That was the only known issue with the membranes.
Okay. Do we also have any other information around Civic Centre costs, or because you got space development? I understand there was quite a bit of work being done around the Civic Centre itself and costs related to it.
As was reported in the paper, we don't know the cost at this point. It's just out for tender. We're reviewing the contracts and that will give us a sense, but it is something that's been flagged with councillors and is within budget.
Okay. And then finally, the Civic Centre Library, the roofing membrane. So once that is corrected, are there any other works relating to the library building itself?
No, not at this stage.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hawkins.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Do we know, just further on the Fisher and Paykel tenancy, do we know if they have moved offices or whether that operation has shrunk, that is in terms of what the reason is for them to no longer need that space?
I understand they just reduced their footprint. I don't have any other intelligence on it.
That's okay. And I'd be interested to know, so in 2014 when Council spent $2.3 million to expand it for their Design Centre of Excellence, predicated on it being of $11 million economic benefit to the city, it might be worth revisiting that to see if that still holds, or if even if we could just get that paper recirculated, that might be helpful.
Look, we'll follow up. Neither Leanne and I are fully briefed on this, but we'll find out the background and recirculate that.
Thank you.
Through the chair, I do know there were some renovations that were meant to occur in 2014 that council funded $75,000 of, and those renovations didn't go ahead, and we've asked for a return of those funds.
Thank you. Sorry, Councillor Elder.
I was just thinking, I remember our newspaper report, this is in relation to Aaron's question, that they moved some of their operations into the old Silver Fern Farms building. This is Fisher and Paykel. So I don't know whether that answers anything or not, but yeah.
I think he's talking about the council report that he sat on round the table on and just wants it compared to. I've got a question on the social housing, and just understanding in paragraph 11 the priorities, and just and who gets in there. The question is, if someone is well above the priority 1, is a resident, but has an income that puts them more into priority 2, do we look at even moving anyone on? Well, in that it is meant to be social housing for the priority 1 needs first and foremost, and I'm not quite sure. I don't know what the policy is there.
I'll have a conversation with our officer who manages that space, but recently in discussing social housing as a whole, I did ask a similar question: do we ever have people who hand back the keys? And the answer was no.
Thank you. It's just, I had a criticism recently about it. That being all of the questions, I've heard Mover and Councillor Lord. Thank you, Councillor Hall, seconding it. Any discussion? Debate? Do you want to speak to your motion first? Sorry.
Discussion point I would have for staff is that I've been on the council for 5 years now, and we've always been told that the community housing is in a block, and basically as long as it's net neutral to council, the money stays in the pot. Now I just wonder, when I see like 6375 Melville Street, you've indicated that there could be 20 units. Well, even at 25 units, that's 200,000 a unit. I just wonder if we could at some point ever get the discussion where we can just check whether that's still a model that we want to keep, or whether there might be another way of managing it. But that's all other than that, I'm happy with the report.
Thank you. Councillor Vandervis.
I'm not happy with the report. For many years now, and many more years in my experience than Councillor Lord, we have had property services coming up with, quite frankly, awkward and difficult decisions needing to be made. The report, although it doesn't give us really any detail on things like 48 School Street, the Melville Street complex, it does, from questioning, suggest that these properties have got to such a state in terms of their deferred maintenance that we're almost having to spend complete rebuild types of money to bring them up to standard. The Property Services Department has been through a lot of changes recently. Well, actually not even that recently. We've been going through changes for far too long now. And none of these changes seems to be addressing what are fundamental issues. There is this issue of constantly escalating costs. Most recently, we've had a dramatic escalation in staff numbers. We have also had escalating outsourcing and escalating evidence of deferred maintenance. My concern is that Property Services, as a DCC-run organisation, seems to have some of the hallmarks of Aurora in terms of being a department that is hard to figure out what's going on in, but keeps coming back with more and more evidence of deferred maintenance and unsatisfactory lease contracts, a whole range of issues that keep coming out of Property Services. And I'm concerned that there is no evidence in this particular report that any of this is being curtailed at this stage. I had hoped that with some of the changes that were obviously needed in the last few years with Property Services, that some of these issues would now be under control. I accept that there are strong moves afoot to try and deal with some of these issues, but I accept also that these issues have been with us for a long time and that they should have been dealt with a lot earlier, and we are still in a situation of trying to deal with them. So in wanting to have my vote against noting this report, I don't particularly want to bag the report. It actually gives us some information, but it doesn't give me the confidence that I feel I need to agree to spending $200,000 or $250,000 on each of the units at Palmyra and at School Street. It doesn't give me the confidence to know that the massive increase in staff resource being thrown at it is actually doing or going to do any good. I think, in fact, I believe we need to very strongly look at Property Services as a unit and decide what really needs to be done to sort out issues that have been with us for far too many years. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Auru.
Hi, I'm just really excited about item number 20, and that is work is progressing to define specific requirements for a permanent hub, and we're getting a project planner with this. Given that Southern District Health Board, Well South, Community Trust, all put into the submissions on this, I can see this as a really exciting potential for partnerships here, and also the co-location of many services. Work and Income, Community Care Trust, PACT, Samoan Advisory Council and Grey Power all have offices in this region, and I just think it's a fantastic move forward and a great vote of confidence in getting this moving forward in South Dunedin. So thank you very much for that, for item number 20, South Dunedin Hub.
Councillor O'Malley.
Thank you. I'm just going to touch back on my questions I sent around social housing again. My feeling is that at 2% of total housing stock, I think we'll probably be on the main centres list on the low end of what a lot of the other cities are doing it, and I feel that we are going to have an acute accommodation requirement for the hospital rebuild, and while not asking for a report to be done at the moment, I'm just raising it now as an idea that also in recognition that we go in 3-year cycle of government. We've just come out of a long-term plan, so I'm not going to revisit that long-term plan, but more to give a heads up that maybe in the next 3 years we need to get our head around a social housing space and understand with the ageing population that we are facing potentially a greater need, and as way of achieving that, we may be able to achieve that in the interim with accommodation for the workers when they come into the city. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Gary, did you?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to speak to this motion, which is around noting the report. I've been very well aware of the challenges this department has had over time, but I've seen on the ground a vast improvement, particularly in the deferred maintenance area. It's not to say that it happens overnight, but certainly the approach and the progress made is very noticeable. And I'm very aware it takes time to turn the ship around. And so I just wanted to note that I have confidence in the department to make the changes needed. And I've no doubt that with the staff there now and the staff recruited, that will carry on.
Thank you. I just wanted to... So did you want to... Oh, Councillor Hawkins, sorry.
Yeah, thank you. Madam Chair, just in response to the discussion around social housing and the degree of need in the community, it's the supply and demand of social housing is certainly a key priority, and the first piece of work that's currently being undertaken through the Mayor's Task Force for Housing. We had a meeting last week of that group, and doing some good work at the moment in terms of trying to get a more detailed picture of exactly what the demand is relative to the current supply, and that's partly Dunedin City Council, partly Housing New Zealand, who are now suddenly interested in developing their social housing portfolio in a way that we haven't seen over the past decade or so, and partly through other providers. The first report from that group to council will come to the August council meeting, at which point we should have a far better picture of what the need is, and from there that can inform decisions and discussions both by council and by other agencies in terms of how we might facilitate increasing demand. The other thing that came out of that meeting that might be of interest to this group is a recommendation to make contact with the Ministry of Social Development to put Dunedin's hand up to be supported through the Housing First initiative, which is a wraparound service to cater for vulnerable, high needs tenants through transitional housing. It started in Hamilton, I think, and has been in the budget for 18-19. The degree of support for that around the country is increasing. Unfortunately, not in this area, but we're certainly keen to see that expanded to this area and work on what a local model for supporting people who have vulnerable housing, high needs housing tenants in Dunedin, but all of that will be reported more thoroughly through the council meeting in August, which will inform a lot of this debate. So just wanted to flag that up.
Well, no, thank you. And I equally had some concerns about the understanding of social housing. The social housing strategy or policy that we have as council showed that in the time that was written, the DCC owned 8% of the rental market, and the only other provider greater than that was the Housing Corporation. So I think we have to be careful what figures mean. And my understanding is that Dunedin's one of the highest councils doing social housing in New Zealand. So it depends what you're comparing and how big each rental market is. Councillor Lord, do you want to do a right of reply? No, thank you. I'll put the vote for noting the report. All in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? No. Thank you. Now, Three Waters Activity Report. Welcome, Mr. Dyer. Would you like to talk to your report or just take questions?
Happy to take it as read. Thank you.
Take it as read. Well done. Any questions of Mr. Dyer? Councillor Lord?
Yeah, Tom, I've got one. I'm just thinking, page 23, item 7, the water supply network includes 21,000 hectares of water catchment. Now, I'm not sure if all of that, I know a large section of that is locked up effectively for keeping the water pure and that sort of thing. I'm just wondering, is there any opportunities on that land to, for example, take 1,000 hectares out and put it in forestry, or is it not that type of is that not really an option at all?
So typically we discourage that. So the catchment land that we do protect is protected because it's a source that we use regularly. Now, if we had 1,000 hectares worth of catchment put into forestry, the first part is putting it into forestry. That would cause a whole lot of sediment and that sort of thing to disrupt the service of that catchment. The vast majority of the land that we own is very high, and therefore the productivity in terms of forestry and that sort of thing would be relatively low. We have some other land closer to town, but it's still steep, challenging to access, and meaning that the economic viability of that sort of activity would be pretty low. But then on top of that, there's the disruption to the primary purpose of the land, which is water supply. So not exploring any of those options at the moment.
Now, the other question that I was thinking about carbon credits. So do we claim, like a lot of that will be sort of native, is there any carbon credits claimed off any of that land, or is it a possibility that we could, Manuka and that sort of thing?
I'm actually really not sure about that. I haven't looked at that in the time that I've been in the role, but I can certainly have a look and answer your question offline.
Well, just if it's an option, why shouldn't we? Why wouldn't we if we could?
Large part of it's tussock, which I'm not quite sure. Councillor Elder.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Tom, for this comprehensive report. Hey, just on figure 3, number of customer complaints for drinking water, and I note that they've come down considerably, which is great to see. I was just wondering, just a comment about that and whether that related to the changeover to the Mosgiel water supply and how people are feeling about that.
Yep. So there's two things you can see in that graph. The first is a big spike in August, and that was related to the Ross Creek event within the Central City Supply Zone, and then we saw elevated levels of complaint through September, October, and November, and we saw quite a few false alarms. So the public's sensitivity to any change in taste or anything around the water supply was quite a lot higher. So the complaints elevated for a period. And we did also see elevated complaints in December, January related to the Mosgiel supply, but that was for that period the stats were in the order of 38 complaints or something like that. It was not enormous. And now they're trending down nicely, which is where we want them to stay.
Well done.
Thank you. Councillor Hall.
Of your 21,000 hectares, is that only the stuff you use for water catchment, or is that your total holding?
I believe that's our total holding.
Because a very large part of your holding is in pine trees at the present time, which is part of 3 Mile Hill, some of Sullivan's Dam, Cedar Creek and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so all of the stuff that is in forestry at the moment is not active water supply catchment, or it's water supply catchment that we can disestablish for a long period of time.
Thank you. Councillor Vandervis.
On page 27, it talks about blockages in number 26, item 26, and that these blockages are often caused by overgrown tree roots in the pipes. Is that because they are clay pipes that have joints in them?
Tree roots can get into all types of pipes, but it is more common. So we occasionally have the odd newer PVC pipe with a rubbering joint that the roots still find their way into. It's rare, but that occurs. We do try and design for that to not occur. So current design standards where there's a high risk of tree root intrusion and that sort of thing, where we have root membrane barriers that go in the trench around the pipe and all of that sort of thing. But the bulk of our tree root incursion occurs in those clay pipes.
Is it possible to reline those clay pipes? For a while there was some plastic lining machine that we were using to put a plastic film, basically put a plastic pipe inside the existing.
Yep, so that is one method that we use from time to time. It depends on a case by case basis. So Some of the pipes that we're addressing at the moment, they need to be on a nice even grade, and we have deflections in some of those grades where bedding material's been eroded over time and that sort of thing, and that can mean that relining the pipe in situ is not an optimum solution. You have to go a little bit further. So while we haven't delivered one of those contracts in the last year or so, I know there are some plans afoot to use that as a method to refurbish some pipes in the next year or so.
Right. You talk about on page 24, item 14, you talk about one of the problems with reduced performance being staff turnover for the contractor. Can you tell us who the contractor is?
So in this case, we're referring to City Care. City Care Limited.
Sorry, how do you spell that?
City
Care.
C-I-T-Y.
Pardon me. Okay. My final question relates to a program that we used to have for separating stormwater and sewage. And my understanding was that up till about 12 years ago or 10 years ago, there was a fairly active program going around checking that houses, in fact, did have a separate stormwater connection. That was discontinued for reasons I don't understand for a while. Are we in a position now where we are actually actively revisiting the issue of separation?
Yep. So from 1991 through to 2002, we have a full suite of records. I think the whole city was surveyed twice to check for connections between the stormwater and wastewater network that were not correct. That work has been done on an ad hoc basis since. So we have a full database of the properties in the city that are compliant and non-compliant. There is a plan in the next year or two to reinstate that same survey, but with a bit more of a targeted approach. So not the whole, not to go and look at every property in the city again, but rather focus on the suburbs and areas where it is more likely that those issues are still in place, or may have, there may have been building work that had caused those cross connections to be reinstated.
Given that everything was looked at, surely it would just be a matter of looking at more modern connections, or was it not looked at properly? No, it was looked at properly, but occasionally you get the odd bit of wayward DIY that can reinstate those types of cross connections, or in some cases there's spots where perhaps there was areas that were the cross connection was thought to be disestablished but was not. Okay, so would it surprise you then to know that even very recently in a LIM report that I saw, that there is no certainty at all regarding the separation of sewage and stormwater, and that this actually applies to two properties that I had a personal interest in, and it appears that neither of them have had a separate stormwater connection, just gone basically straight into the sewage.
Right.
If things were done properly in terms of these are not new builds, these are long-established properties. If things were done properly, why is it then that on the LIM reports there is still a suggestion that, in fact, there is no certainty that there is any separation?
So there is still a few hundred properties within the city that are recorded as having cross connections still established, and those were some of the areas that we were set out to target.
Okay, so you actually have a list of several hundred properties that have cross connections?
Yes.
So why aren't you actively pursuing those owners because it's their liability, as I understand from DCC paperwork, why aren't you actively pursuing those owners to make sure that separate connections are done?
We're about to begin that work.
Sorry?
We're about to begin that work. How actively we pursue that would yet to define, but that is a work program that's in place for the next year or two.
Right. Okay. Thing is, I have brought this up before, and I'm concerned that it doesn't seem to have the kind of priority which I would have hoped it had, especially considering if you look at the residents of Surrey Street, having their sewage system completely overcharging because of stormwater getting into the sewage system. Now, I recognise that this is just one way that stormwater gets in and that there are other ways through clay pipes, whatever. But given that we have really quite a severe issue, can you not give us any assurance that this can't be sorted out, a couple of hundred properties in the next year or so?
I believe I've given that assurance. We have a work plan in place, and we'll be beginning that work over the next year.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gary.
Thank you. Before I ask my question, I just wanted to note the recent very positive feedback about members of your staff who are doing an excellent job and have been complimented on their excellent professionalism, empathy and listening skills in relation to dealing with residents with some very difficult issues. So I'll just note that. My question is around item number 37 on page 28, and I was really pleased to see that the additional scope of landscaping and incorporation of the arts and crafts and infrastructure policy. I'm really interested to know how the process that you'll follow. I'm looking forward to a time when that's at the beginning of the project. I understand why it wasn't, but could you just talk us through how the process that will be followed to execute that?
Sure. So there is a briefing document going out to a number of interested artists over the next wee while, which talks to the civil and landscaping works that are still to be carried out, and therefore the highlight some of the potential opportunities to incorporate some creativity into that mix. There's the briefing document includes very little restriction, rather just opportunity and a rough order allowance for budget.
So my question is around how will you reach those artists? Will there be a particular kind of artists, for example? Will there be sculptors, or will you leave it really wide open?
Really broad.
Really broad. And how will you reach them?
So we have a number of people that work within the council that carry quite wide networks. So that's one way, and then there will also be some more broad advertising as well.
Excellent, thank you.
Councillor Wiley.
Thank you. Tom, page 28, paragraph 35, coastal erosion. Just getting an understanding of the sand sausages, and I've saw the article in the ODT. Has any dialogue taken with Mr Brown over this, or is it just with the Sinclair Action Group?
There's been some dialogue with the Sinclair Action Group, but also I believe Mr Brown contacted one of my staff, and they've had a conversation. He was comfortable with the course of action that we were taking.
Okay, and there's been no additional erosion off the end of the sand sausages? The sand levels dropped quite significantly over the last few months. They have increased again now after a period of easterly swell, but not back to the same level that they were at during summer. We've had some bags at the front of the sand sausage structure that have shifted forwards, and they'll be replaced over the next couple of weeks, and have some additional restraint put in place in the form of some posts. Okay, and then at the end of it, because that was one of the concerns that Mr Brown brought to us numerous times, was the fact we only were doing 250 metres, I think it was, and what was happening to the next.
So far we've seen no significant negative effects further down the beach, and no end wall effect, but that's not to say that it couldn't occur during a large event.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hawkins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A few questions. Firstly, just in relation to the education work that was going on the campus end. Just trying to find the paragraph. It's called "Welcome to my flat" or "Welcome to our flat" or whatever. And a similar question was asked about the education work at the last round of this meeting, I think. But I'm just curious as to how we're measuring success with that, and whether it's early enough at this point to... Are we still on water? We're still doing water? No. My apologies. My apologies.
So moving right along, Councillor Newell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Tom, just one regarding paragraph 36 on page 28 regarding Kaikoura Valley 3. Just wondering how work's progressing there.
So we... Where to start? So School Street, the section School Street, some construction work has begun there. There was an Aurora cable, quite a significant cable that needed to be secured and realigned slightly to enable some works there. So that has been done, is all but done. We have a contract let for that portion of the work too. So the most critical section of the wider Kaikoura Valley Phase 3 package is the replacement of a culvert under School Street and the instatement of a secondary flow path to stop houses from flooding when the School Street stream area does lift or rise. That contract, as I said, has been let, and I believe it's Downer will be on site as soon as Delta have finished their work. The wider piece of work that includes the replacement of a significant foul sewer right the way through the Kaikoura Common up to Bishop's Court. There is quite a lot of intricacy in that piece of work and quite a lot of stakeholder interest in how we carry out that work and what the reserve looks like post the construction work. So we're continuing to work with stakeholders on that to make sure that it's that we meet everyone's expectations. That part of the reason that we've delayed so significantly is to allow for planting seasons and make sure that the any of that type of risk is mitigated as best we can.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, look, I don't know if it's an appropriate question or not, but I was just going to ask, in view of Andrew's or Councillor Wiley's questions about the sand dunes that Mr Brown was deeply concerned about at one stage. I'm assuming since that time they've sort of weathered off and formed a new sort of leading face. They're not deteriorating like they once were?
No, they're certainly not deteriorating as they were prior to the installation of the sand sausage.
Thank you.
Councillor Steadman.
Thank you. You know what this is about, probably. Just regarding 35 there, the coastal erosion, those poles were put in front of the smaller bags. Is that a continuation of the work, or do you have to apply for consents with regard to that?
So we talked to the IOC about that, and we've been able to deliver that work as a maintenance activity of those bags. So if we hadn't carried out that work, there was a risk that the bags continued to migrate, and then the role of those tow bags is to stop water from getting in underneath the big bags. And the IOC agreed that that was a necessary activity for the maintenance of that structure.
So that would lead me to the poles, obviously, which Mr Redditch has obviously mentioned and have been put in there, and the lack of maintenance has allowed those to go to what they are now. And could be arguments either way. So why they allow the maintenance there but not the maintenance of the bigger poles that could actually allow the sand to actually sit over the bags, possibly?
The difference here was that we could demonstrate a clear link between maintenance of a structure that was having a clear benefit and the other part was that the groins had so badly deteriorated that any reinstatement of that structure would be considered to be more than maintenance, but it was ultimately just a definition.
Okay. Next question. I just want to know about plantings along that beach area. I went for a walk quite some time ago with Paul Pope, the erosion specialist. Plantings would help the sand be retained naturally in that area. And I still see not a lot has happened. Is there anything further going to be happening soon with regard to that, or where are we at?
So we've been working with Sinclair Action Group on establishing some further planting in that area. We tried to explore some opportunities more recently, but things didn't work out. But we're still certainly progressing those conversations and looking to try and achieve something there. Certainly see some benefit.
Thank you.
Councillor Elder.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a quick question, related issues, and that is how are the dugout channels working in the sand dunes? Can you give us a bit of feedback about that?
Yep, so they're working as expected. We're starting to see reasonable volumes of sand stored in the trough between the fore and rear dune, and we'll continue to monitor them, and we're continue to monitor them. We've also engaged with some representatives of the university to monitor those dunes more, I guess, aggressively, and ensure that we get good data and can base any future decisions on good science.
Sounds like a great collaboration.
It's working well.
Thank you.
Okay, no further questions. I'm happy to put the motion that we note the report. Seconded, Councillor O'Malley. Any discussion? All in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you, Mr Doe. Mr Henderson, Mr Hawkins, Councillor Hawkins has a question for you apparently.
Well signposted.
Would you like to talk to your report before he asks the question?
No, happy to take it.
Very good. Thank you, Councillor Hawkins.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I can paraphrase my own question. How are we measuring success, and is it too soon to know if it has been successful, the education work that was going on in the campus area at the beginning of the year?
So that was the first time we'd actually, well, it's not the first time we'd actually done that, but it's a constant, I'd call it a constantly evolving program. Measuring success, no, we don't have any good measure of the success of the campaign, but we're constantly trying to improve the engagement that we're having, in an effort to engage obviously with the, especially in that area, it's a very highly mobile, the population changes very often, so it's very hard to actually get a good gauge of what impact we're having, apart from the number of people that we're actually engaging with on a day-to-day basis. We don't, in regards to the welcome to your flat packs that we dropped off, it's a good effort. We don't even know if they were read or just went straight in the recycling bin.
Or worse.
Or worse, yes.
So I guess that the question more generally is, when we're developing education programs, would it not be useful to have an idea of what it is that we're trying to achieve by those programs and how we might measure if they are being achieved?
Yes, for the more structured programs, the actual educational programs that we run on a regular basis, we do follow up with feedback forms after a period of time, say 3 months, etc., for the Love Food, Hate Waste campaigns, those kind of things. We always survey afterwards to actually see, how did you find the course, has your behaviours changed, is there anything we could improve on, that sort of thing, to actually, on those ones. It is, if I could come up with a good way of following up and getting good information on the impact in the campus area, I definitely would be doing that. It's just it's a difficult nut to crack.
Yeah, and I appreciate that it's not statistically, the methodology isn't entirely sound, but are we essentially using complaints, contamination rates, those sorts of things as a proxy for whether this sort of stuff is working?
Well, that's the only stuff we can use as a proxy, yes. I think the idea in that area, our main goal is to actually make sure that we're trying to engage, trying our best, and obviously things, working on the assumption that things would be much worse if we weren't trying.
Thank you. And I've got two questions from outside the time frame of this report, but they are mentioned in next steps and therefore I think are safe. And one is just picking up on that. When would we expect to see options around locations for the expansion of the community recycling facilities into the university and the CBD area? Is that a report that's coming to us imminently?
I hadn't actually thought about the reporting dates at the moment. We're working very closely with the university property services, and we're engaging with the Polytech now to actually define what locations are suitable to both of us. At the moment we've identified 2 in the northern area, 2 in the southern area as locations for additional recycling hubs. Basically just nailing those locations down at the moment. So they would be based on the progress to date. I would like to think that we could report those to the next INSCOM quarterly report.
Great, thank you. And just finally, at the top of that next steps section, talking about developing an app specifically for curbside collection services. Rather than starting from scratch to build something specifically for this service delivery, has any thought been given to just shoehorning it into platforms that already exist, whether that's My Little Local or whatever we might be building organisation-wide? I'd just hate to think that everyone's going off and building an app all of a sudden, as great as that is for our local IT community.
Yeah, we did try initially, especially because Christchurch has already developed an app, and we tried to get them to basically share or sell us the app that they'd already developed. No luck there, they wouldn't share it. So we are developing an app, but we're trying to keep in mind that we want it to be hopefully integrated into the local app, etc., so that it can actually work with those, to be part of that.
As opposed to just feeding information into an existing platform?
I'm not too sure. Obviously, I'm not quite understanding your question, I'm afraid. We want the app, it will be a standalone app, but it will actually be drawing on existing information and just basically being the front portal to existing information.
Do you know what the pickup rate in Christchurch was for their rubbish app?
Among the younger population, I couldn't give you figures, no, but I believe it was a fairly demographic uptake that was very high amongst 30 below and considerably lower above that level.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr Henderson, thank you for your report and all the work you're doing, and want to commend you on that. But I wanted to ask if you considered flipping the approach when it comes to the university. I get really concerned when I read these reports in that there's a presumption that the university students, and we get this in the media quite a lot too, are musherers and don't care. And I know that, you know there's a lot more to it than that. But it seems to me that a lot of the university students are actually a whole lot ahead of us in terms of waste minimisation and an interest in these kind of areas. Do you engage with groups like the various environmental groups on campus? Because there are a number of them, and there is a cohort of students who are really interested in this area. And I just noticed, for example, your education around composting, which is, from the feedback I've had, is an area of interest, is basically in the spring months, which of course is not the best time for university. So have you considered a different approach?
Not so much a different approach. We do engage with the OUSA at regular intervals. We actually deal with them quite a lot, especially through the tertiary sector planning group. So we do engage with the student organisations and via them out further. The university, obviously, it is treated as a separate case. You have a much denser population base per household. They normally don't have any green space or anything else like that. So even when it comes to composting, those kind of workshops or education is actually very little use to them, and most of them, they'd be lucky if they've got a little patch of grass.
What about the things like the Bokashi buckets? I mean, there's no information, as I understand it, about that. Well, perhaps there is. Maybe I have that wrong in the Welcome to Your Flat information.
Yeah, so that's in the Welcome to Your Flat, but we also, with Campus Watch, we also, Campus Watch actually have some Bokashi bins and recycling bins and that kind of thing. So on that education side of things, we try and work with them as well, because they're obviously in that area all the time.
Great. Thank you. I just think that possibly is an area that needs a bit more work.
Councillor O'Malley.
Chris, thank you, Madam Chair. Chris, point 18 on the landfill methane gas collection. I note there's been a lot of improvement there in terms of efficiency of collection and the flare and all that sort of stuff. When do we get audited, or when do we self-audit on our methane capturing, and does that have an impact on our emission trading scheme costs?
We submit the data annually, and it's basically a January to January event. The audit, if you're actually talking about an ETS training scheme audit of our data, they do a desktop audit every time, and to my knowledge we have never actually had a on-site audit, then we actually come down and double-checked it, to my knowledge.
Yeah, it's more the first part. So our number that we report, we should be reporting now that we're capturing a lot more methane, and will that have an impact on our ETS obligations? Will that reduce our ETS obligations?
Yes, it will. The improved figures will allow us to actually, and the solid waste assessment protocol that we're doing at the moment, which is actually basically a physical audit of the rubbish going into the landfill. We can use that data to apply for a unique emissions factor.
And we'll have a sense of how much we're flaring as well, right? If we ever want to make a suggestion as to whether or not we want to capture that in some other way, like electricity production or something like that.
We will do soon. There wasn't actually any flow meter on that, but the flow meter has just been installed within the last couple of weeks to give us accurate data on what's been flared off.
Yeah, cool. And another point, I know we're meeting in other rooms and discussing some of this stuff, but I think it's got to bring it up here. Weighbridges at the landfill, we're talking about an opportunity for people to be captured pretty much after they've gone in. Like a private vehicle goes in at the moment, they pay per vehicle, and we're trying to capture them to encourage them to recycle, but they won't get any, at this point, any monetary reward for doing so. Where are we with the ability to weigh private vehicles, and in doing so charge them per weight of material lost, dumped, and then in such a way then they could actually get a reward for recycling?
So I've got, we've just recently within the last month or so initiated a piece of work with Waste Management, who are obviously operating the landfill out there. We're digging up some old plans that never went anywhere for actually rejigging the whole layout of that site to try and put the diversion and recycling right up front, as opposed to having to divert off separately, and then enabling the fact that we can actually, through Waste Management contacts, go for a second weighbridge so that we can weigh in and out, which will all form part of that, encouraging the correct behaviour, because it will encourage people to make the most of the diversion opportunities and only pay for the waste that can't be diverted or recycled.
Councillor Elder.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a quick question. I see you've got some really good streams for recycling, and I just wanted to know a wee bit more about what Kiwi Harvest do, because it looks amazing.
So Kiwi Harvest are a not-for-profit organisation that actually operates out beside the railway. There's the, I can't remember the name of the street. They actually rent a council building in the old gravel car park just on the other side of the railway line. Yeah, at the end of Thomas Burns, thank you very much. So basically they are a not-for-profit. They do have paid people in the delivery vans, but mainly staffed by volunteers. They go through the CBD for us down here. They're established in Dunedin and in Auckland. They go to the supermarkets, go to the cafes, etc., pick up any food that's just gone past expiry or is just about to be thrown out. They take it back, and then they actually then split it up into packages with fruit, vegetables, everything else, etc., and then deliver those back out again to social organisations, Meals on Wheels, etc., that they can be turned back into meals. They do that every day that the CBD is actually open.
Wow, and so you're looking at continuing to support that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's got a lot of social benefits, but it also has had a significant impact on food waste to the landfill, so more than worthy.
I think it's fantastic. Thank you.
Okay, that's the questions. I'm happy to move that we note the report as per the paper. Seconded, Councillor Lord. Any further discussion? All in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against, carried. Thank you. Thank you, Chris. Welcome, Mr. Saunders. Long wait. We're now doing the transport activity report for the quarter ended the 31st of March. Would you like to speak to that? Take it as read. Any questions of Mr. Saunders? Councillor Vandervis.
On page 50 it talks about the Peninsula Connection Safety Improvement Project and says that Fulton Hogan was selected. Is this the Peninsula project that was budgeted at 45 million but blew out to 65 million?
So the tender that we received, or the initial price that was assessed, was significantly higher than the budget. So
20 million?
Yep, approximately. So we've gone through a process of reviewing those tender prices and are working with Fulton Hogan. They've been awarded the first section of work, and we're currently working through the remaining sections to ensure we can deliver it for the project budget.
And roughly what percentage of the total 45 million budget is the first section that you're now talking about?
The first section would be approximately 20 to 25.
Was this tender put out as a separable contract, or was it put out as a contract en masse?
It was put out as a single contract with separable portions included, but it was a single tender, but separable portions within that.
So the contract was arranged so that separable portions could be accepted without accepting the whole, is
That's correct.
Oh, great. Okay, good. Thank you for that clarification. Regarding the next item, 35, the Urban Cycleway Program, it says it includes a new bridge over the Leith. That's pretty clear, came in just above what was hoped for. Does this contract also include the $1.5 million that we agreed to prior to Christmas to moving the main trunk line over underneath the Wycliffe Street overbridge?
It does include that section of work, including the railway, when you're shifting the railway siding down through to the existing crossing on Wycliffe Street. So those designs are still being worked on. But that section you're talking about is included in that package of work, again as a separable portion.
Why is it that this $1.5 million to move the main trunk line or siding has never been identified in any agenda, the original agenda or this one?
So the designs for consultation came to an infrastructure meeting August last year, which showed the final concept designs which we took out for consultation. So that
but
was
they
included
did
at
not
that time.
identify 1.5 million for moving the railway line.
I'll have to go back and check that, Councillor.
Oh, you don't need to. Don't worry. I was there and complained about it at the time. What I'm concerned about is that this $1.5 million of what I consider to be utter madness in spending has not appeared in any agenda then or now.
Look, the cycleways as a package did come to committee or council and...
Oh, I'm very aware they came as a package, and that package was, in my opinion, completely deficient in terms of detail. And if the public actually knew what was actually being spent and for what reason, I think there would be great concern, and it concerns me that we still don't have that kind of detail being registered.
This
in
is
any
a question
of
on the
agenda
paper.
papers.
Can we just have questions on this paper, please?
Yes. Yep, the question was, why is it not included? Why is it not specified again in item 35?
And Mr Saunders said he thought it had been, but then you've disagreed with that. Thank you.
Well, no, the 1.5 million has never been in any...
but it's not in this paper.
He didn't disagree with that. He just said he would have to look back at the item. I said he didn't need to because I already have.
Thank you, but that's not on this paper.
1.5 million has never been identified. I believe it has to be.
Thank you. Moving on, have you got another question? No. Councillor Benson-Pope.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A couple of issues. The first one in paragraph 9, where there's a mention of asbestos traces in mud tank residue. I was under the impression that asbestos was only a threat if it was airborne. Is that the case here?
That's correct. So the concern is if asbestos within the wet product that's coming out of the tanks gets onto clothing or within vehicles and then dries and becomes airborne. So we're going through that process, and we've actually just received a new safe work practice from Downer for the continuation of mud tank cleaning. So we're not far away from having a regular tank back on the network.
Okay, that clarifies that. Thank you. The other one is in relation to the notice of motion that I moved at council, which was referred here, to which you refer in paragraph 29 following, and I'm probably seeking some procedural guidance from Ms. Graham. Before I come to that, though, it's your view that there's no change in the paragraphs 29 to 31 where you talk about the fact that this is an issue that can be accommodated, and clearly rerouting of buses will be necessary as part of the work if we ever get round to doing it in George Street.
Yes, that's my if and when the Central City project commences, there will need to be diversions or detours put in place.
And the comment you make about the discussions the Chief Executive has had with the Regional Council and the Chief Executive of the Regional Council, that stands. There's no change to that. Can I, when this report has been, or sometime before when you deal with this, can I then come back to the matters of the procedural matter of the notice of motion, which is still sitting on the table here, and I'll be asking for the leave of the committee to withdraw that.
Councillor Gary.
Thank you. I just want to pick up a point that follows on from my question to Mr Henderson, and it's number 17. I note the increases in illegal dumping requests coincided with the end of the university year, and you're working to be better prepared. In that better preparation, has it been taken into account that students have no transport generally, and so difficult to deliver those unwanted items? I'm assuming that's all been taken into consideration.
Yeah, I guess we do work closely with Chris's team on this. Our role is generally one of collecting the waste when it is found, but we do certainly feed in and discuss regularly around what improvements could be made. But in terms of support, that probably sits better with the waste program.
Though, so that's why I'm asking it here. Second question is around the traffic management, and it's sort of 18 down, and I note that there was an issue where in some cases the site layout didn't match the traffic management plan. I want to note a positive to say the new the arms that are being used on the Peninsula Connection have been very well received in terms of traffic management, but I wanted to know, were any of the issues that are noted on the Peninsula Connection sites at all?
No, it was a separate site.
Separate sites, okay, thank you. And could you tell us a little bit more about the lifting chain and crane inspected were not certified devices? I was a little anxious to see that they were given a month to remove them. I would have thought that would have been immediate. Can you talk about that?
Look, I don't have all the details other than the month is when we do our, we have a monthly health and safety check with Downer, but I do know that they deal with these issues straight away. So I don't know the details or the technical details of it, other than it was picked up through one of our routine audits and then rectified through that process as well.
Okay, thank you. A curious question, and my second last one. I note that there's been a bit of a survey going on around the cycle counters, and I noted the increase in cyclists, but I was fascinated to know why gender was of importance.
So that's a requirement of the NZTA survey. So, and I believe, and I have to go back and check, that there is, or anecdotally, the interest of a bit concerned is significantly female dominant in terms of those that are comfortable to be riding. So they are interested to know whether the increases are consistent trends or male dominant.
Fascinating. And last no.
Can I just ask a question on that? How do you tell the difference some days?
I was going to say, I didn't. How does a counter work?
You're in fun.
Sorry to take away your thunder, Councillor Gary.
Thank you. I'm so glad you asked that question. I did not. So 40 and 41, talking about the LED street light installation, and I don't think you were here during the 10-year plan submissions when we had a couple of very interesting submissions around that. And I guess I wanted to know whether those issues around the 2800, given the technology is still catching up. It's a bit like buying a computer, isn't it? There's got to be a cut-off point at which you say, I'm never going to get the latest, we'll pick it up. But it seemed to me there was a lot of concern to go with Amber in one case, and I'll be interested to hear what you have to say about that. And the 2800, it was good to see that the NZTA had deferred their deadline for a while, so that was good news. But could you talk us through a little bit more of that and how much influence we will have over the decision? Because it was a very important discussion for this council I picked up around the table.
Yes, so we've got a workshop booked for July, at which time our technical advisor on the project will be in attendance and can explain this a lot better than I can. But certainly the blue light issue, which is effectively what it is, how much blue light is contained within the LEDs, is something that is very topical, and there's more work being done on that all the time. We brought a report to council last year on the issue, and were at that time acknowledging the desire of what is a fairly large group within Dunedin to look at an alternate to the 4,000 Kelvin, which is what is used for the predominantly in New Zealand, and sought 3,000, which is what's been included in the NZTA business case. That's been submitted, and we're waiting to hear the result of that. And obviously, it is good news that we've got the subsidy increased. Any further than that is something that I think there is more than just the blue light in terms of the quality of light and what it produces, and I wouldn't consider myself qualified enough to comment on that, other than to say it's part of the tender process and the assessment for the type of fitting that we will use, and there will be a chance to ask a lot more, and there will be a subsequent report, so that it is public. It won't just be
I guess that's the assurance I wanted, and it was around not having a fait accompli presented, but us having the opportunity to hear the technical insights. Thank you.
Councillor O'Malley.
Thanks. I've actually just got an additional question now that Councillor Gary just said that one. What's the energy savings when we do flip over to LED, roughly on a annual or monthly basis?
It's approximately 50% is what we've had. The figures vary, but we approximately 50-60%.
What does that translate out into dollars? Do you know, by any chance?
I wouldn't know. Sorry, Councillor.
Okay.
I have to go and check.
But obviously, the reason is that then obviously every month that we defer in a decision is we have to weigh that against.
Yes,
yes,
as well as the fact that our existing streetlight asset is significantly aged and is having its own maintenance challenges. So we are very keen to get it underway, but at the same time we're very keen to make sure we get the right outcome. But it is, we will be presenting these now with a view to starting that rollout as soon as we can.
Mm-hmm. And my next question is more or less again just to flag a thought, and that is July 2017 flood remediation is still ongoing, which means we'll be going to hit the 12-month anniversary of that fairly soon. So the question I would have is, are we sufficiently resourced, given that we seem to be having enough of these events coming on over again, that are we actually going to clear the previous year's floods before the next year's ones come through?
Are we resourced enough? Josh may have a different opinion on this, given how much time he spends on it, but yes, one of our challenges has been contracting resource. Because it's very hard for the companies to gear up for these types of unknown events and then have enough resource there for us to use in unplanned events. So that's been a challenge, but we've had very good involvement from all the various companies around Dunedin. We will have cleared all of the minor jobs, so there were I think over 1,000 minor jobs that were logged after that event. There will still be around 20 of the more significant sites either to be finished or finished post 1 July, but we know them all, designs underway, and they will roll into the 18-19 year and go through a design, procurement, construct phase. So look, we've certainly had the bulk of the work done, but there are a few slip sites that will still need to be dealt with next year.
Sorry, are you ready to go? Yep. Oh, Councillor Benson Pope first. Thank you.
Just 3 questions. The first is, irrespective of the workshop, and it's a bit of an ongoing moving feast, I appreciate. Are you able to repeat the assurance that was given to us last time that the final decision will be made by council rather than staff in respect of what the specification is?
We will bring a report to have a decision made before we start putting new lights up.
Thank you. The second part is, one would assume, because it's not all going to be done at once, that even if in the undesirable outcome that we go with a less than optimal solution for the beginning of this program, it would be possible as technology improves that further contracts would be able to use a better product. Is that something that's factored into your decision making, or is the whole lot going to be bought in one big hit?
I would have to, I couldn't answer that until I'd have to go back and check on how the procurement will work. I can't see a reason why it couldn't, because it will be a long-term.
So you will report on that?
We can include that in the report when a decision is made.
Yep. And the third question is, can I safely assume that none of the LED luminary purchase, to say nothing of the lights themselves, is being considered for the areas that will be part of the Central City upgrade, given that we don't know what's going to be there yet?
That's correct. That's excluded.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just a couple of questions in the minor improvement projects, which look really great. Implementation of the barn dance intersections. A question I was just going to have is there consideration for South Dunedin to get this reinstated? They were the last ones to have it, I think.
They were, and we have had a significant number of questions around that intersection. So that is one that the team will assess once we've finished the rollout of the Central City intersections that we're looking to do first, and we're not far off completing those. And they'll go and assess the suitability of that intersection for a barn stance in terms of the number of pedestrians, the impact on traffic movements, and we'll make a decision from there. But it is certainly being considered. We have had a number of requests about that intersection.
And the town belt traverse pedestrian safety improvements, can you tell us a wee bit about those?
Yeah, certainly. So we've the town belt is obviously a significant recreation space, as well as a route used by commuters. And we have had a request for a number of annual plans from the Amenity Society to improve the safety for pedestrians. They run their, I think it's biannual event now, the Town Belt Traverse. So we have a safety project which is now well underway, which is really just defining a walking space on the edge. It's not a fully formed or asphalted footpath, because we've got to be obviously aware of the environment that it's within and trying to work within that. But there is now, if you've been up there recently, a better formed and safer footpath that will allow people to eventually walk from end to end without having to be on the road at any point, which is what the case was sort of a few months ago.
So would that include cycling as well through the town belt?
This is a pedestrian path,
Okay.
It's not constructed for as a shared path.
Oh, thanks for that, because yes, it's a great.
Councillor Gary.
Thank you. I had an additional question. Richard, on page 45 you just mentioned leaf drop, and from the feedback I've had and what I've been observing over the last couple of weather events, that it seems to me that people in the community here are taking much more responsibility for the mud tanks in the areas outside their homes and are checking them prior to a weather event. First of all, would that be your take on it?
Yeah, I think there is better awareness now of that if a tank grate is completely blocked by debris, it's not going to be able to function, and it is part of the regular messaging we put out through comms if there is a weather event forecast. So I think there is a better understanding of that now, and I would imagine that flows through to general checking, even if there's not a weather event.
And it seems to me that people don't believe it all has to be left to council to do that. I wanted to ask you about the leaf drop in particular, because you can have cleaned things and then 5 minutes later you've got your leaf drop the wind blows, there's a leaf drop, and then you have your weather event. So is that an area that you're going to focus on?
So there's there is extra resource brought on when around this time of year. So it is within the transport maintenance contract. The contract will bring on additional staff to deal with that.
Sorry, I was thinking more in terms of educating people so that they can do that for you, because
we will continue with the messaging, but ultimately we do have the resource to complete it. It is a challenge if we get high winds at the wrong time and then followed by heavy rain, and that's when the messaging does need to go out, and we'll continue that with comms for sure. But we also have a heavy program of maintenance, and if there is weather forecast, we will go to the high risk areas and ensure that those areas and tanks that are cleaned first.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Newell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Richard, just on paragraph 48 as well, regarding the Barnes Dance crossings. Just a quick question. There has been a little bit of confusion regarding the walking man is green. I know overseas that some of them have been white. Is it a major for us to change the LEDs and make them white?
So the standards in New Zealand require them to be green.
Okay,
and
cool.
Yeah,
that's all good.
Requires them to be green.
I don't think there are any more questions. Just before I move it, the question that Councillor Elder put to you earlier about cycling in the town belt, I'm just wondering, sharrows are used on the George Street where it's 30 k's an hour. Have we ever considered some of the town belt having sharrows in it? Or are they not an acceptable answer yet? Sharrow is the cycling arrows thing, that shared space. Okay. Yeah, sorry.
I'm not sure, Councillor. I have to go and check whether it has been considered and discarded, or it may not have been considered.
Okay. I'm not quite sure. Those were a trial when we first put them out, and whether NZTA had accepted them as a long-term solution. Okay, thank you. I'm happy to move that the committee notes the transport activity report for the quarter ended 31st of March 2018. Seconded Councillor O'Malley. Any discussion? Councillor Vandervis?
I just wanted to briefly note the mud tank cleaning target of 97% and to applaud the system that we now have for actually tracking this. In many years gone by, there was no tracking system at all. In fact, the years where there was no cleaning at all. So we can now be confident that that issue is dealt with, and I'm very grateful for staff for giving us this very clear information on it. Thank you.
Thank you. All in favour? Oh, sorry, he's talking to it. Sorry.
I wanted to note the progress of the Peninsula Connection, which is mentioned in this report, and it's proceeding at a rapid rate. And there is a huge amount of positive feedback in the community about that. They can see the improvements taking place before their eyes. There has been some concern about going forward, and I'm sure this has been taken into account, Richard, around the next visitor season and how we make sure that that any stop goes and traffic management takes into account, as you have done so very well before, the busy double cruise ship days. I'm sure that will be incorporated into your planning. But the positive feedback from the community is tremendous, and we can see the effect it's going to have on connecting our communities. So congratulations on that.
Thank you. No further speakers. All in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Also with you, I think, is the naming of the... Oh, sorry, apologies. I was meant to, at this point, also invite...
Well, I think the issue's clear. I mean, it's a procedural one. The council referred a motion here, which hasn't appeared on the order paper, but is referred to in the report. I'm confident that the issue is mainstream, if you like. Everyone knows what the issues are. We know that the modelling asked for is going to happen as part of the plan, and clearly there's major work that will require the shifting of routes, which the regional council have said they can accommodate. So I think the issue is dealt with, and I'm asking for the leave of the meeting to withdraw that motion. It doesn't have to be unanimous. I've checked, that's what we were discussing. It's a simple majority, if necessary, of those present and voting.
And you're seconding, Councillor Hawkins. So its motion is to...
Well, I'm not sure it's a motion. Is it? I mean, the motion that I moved to council is technically on the table. but I'm quite happy to move that.
The wording is, as I'm sure that the GSO can ensure that that's right, but that to withdraw. Okay. I think it is still a motion to leave to withdraw. Okay, so that's been...
Can we see the motion?
The motion is to withdraw.
Yeah, the motion that you want to withdraw, can we see that?
It's the notice of motion that I moved at the council meeting about buses coming out of George Street. Where have you been?
That's the motion. And
if you don't mind.
So
if you don't mind, I've been here and listening, and I do remember what I want to see is the wording of the motion that we're currently going to withdraw. It's a process issue, Councillor Benson.
Sorry, thank you. Sorry, the wording is, we can't put it up on the screen because it's being run by the other computer, but the other wording is available and Ms Lapham is about to read it to us.
That the Council advises the Otago Regional Council that infrastructural and design changes planned for George Street require that bus routes leave George Street at Frederick Street, accessing the new bus hub via Great King Street.
So the motion now is to withdraw that. It was referred to here, it wasn't passed, it was left on the table to come here, and now it's been withdrawn. Okay? So that's the motion. It's been seconded. Any further debate? All in favour, please. Oh, sorry? Yes? I didn't see your hand.
No, nothing. I was just jumping in to say as a procedural motion it can't be debated, but no one's got anything to say, so it became a moot.
That's great. Thank you for your assistance there, fellow chair. All in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Thank you. The number 9 item is naming of the private way off Blackhead Road, Dunedin. That's Delamore Lane suggestion. You're dealing with this, Richard. Councillor Benson Pope. Option 1. Delamore Lane has been moved, seconded by Councillor Lord. Would you like to talk to that motion now that it's been seconded? Any discussion? All in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. I'm just going to, and I know that everyone wants to leave, but I actually think it's only fair on staff that we have a 5-minute adjournment. If it's been sitting for over 2 hours, and on that basis, if we can be back here in 5 minutes, because I think the next item will take more than 5 minutes.
Do you want me to second that?
I have now got a quorum. Welcome all back to this meeting. Thank you. Mr Saunders, would you like to talk to this paper being the Mount Ross Road Bridge replacement options?
Yes, I will, thank you. Just by way of introduction and maybe to head off a few questions that may be coming. So this report was intentionally a high-level options report to inform our discussions with, first of all, NZTA around funding, and also to assist this, or the committee or council around a decision for the rebuild. Certainly, the point made by the public forum, no, he's gone again, public forum today around consultation with nearby landowners, the community board and the broader community is an important one and will absolutely be done through the design process should we go ahead. But at this point in time, it not considered necessary in terms of the length of time it would have taken and the information required to make that first decision about a rebuild. But if the decision of the committee is to go ahead with a replacement for the bridge, then there will be discussions with a number of groups out in the Middlemarch area to make sure we get the right product for them at the end of the day. So ultimately that's what this report does, and happy to take questions on anything in the report or the attachment.
Just before we do that, can I just understand, are you seeking us to decide a particular option, or that a out of the ones in the Opus report, or are you seeking clarity from us that we ask staff to continue, that we want to get a bridge, but how that works is done with further consultation?
Ultimately, the feedback that we have got is that the time is critical, and we've known that since day one. It has taken us some time to get to this point. My preference would be that the committee decides on the type of bridge so that we can give a good guide to the team that will undertake the design process, which will get us the new bridge quicker. Okay,
thank you. Councillor Benson-Pope, you had a question?
Yeah, it's a question. I'm also foreshadowing that I'm keen to move option 4. But I am concerned about the quality of the information here. I mean, we heard at the public forum, Mr Saunders, that the consultant, the Wellington Opus consultant, didn't talk to the parties immediately involved in the use of the bridge in the area. And I have to say that I found the report, apart from being only semi-literate, was incredibly convoluted and unhelpful. I mean, I want to know how much we paid, as I alerted the chair to the question, for this report, because I consider it unsatisfactory in all sorts of areas, and I wouldn't have thought a report asking for some sort of advice about a bridge replacement would pretty much recommend whatever you liked, which is what the report does, and I just think it was unsatisfactory on all sorts of counts. And how much did it cost, please?
I'd have to go and check the final cost for that report, but I can do that.
I did talk to Richard about some other matters about the report, but I forgot to ask that one, which is my fault.
Can we all be informed in due course, please?
Certainly.
Welcome back to the public forum, Mr Leslie. Good timing. Councillor Gary?
Thank you. Richard, can you just clarify, because I would have to agree, I thought the report was confusing in some areas, and I want clarity because certainly the...
Can I just have which report, because there's a report and an Opus report.
Sorry, the Opus report, yeah. I wanted clarity around the weight in terms of the new heritage bridge. And what capacity, because there's different figures used as far as I could tell. Perhaps I just overlooked it. So could you talk about that a little bit, please?
So I guess I'll answer that in two parts. One is that from my point of view, the Opus report it gives us the information we required to progress this. It is by no means a fully detailed report, and I'd accept that, and that's something that we would need to work through. The weights, essentially, if a new bridge was constructed, be it a heritage bridge or a new bridge, and they're just terms that are used for the aesthetics of the bridge more than anything, they will be able to construct that to a weight that is required through consultation with the users of the bridge. We heard today 50 tonne being the weight that would be good to achieve to allow full use of that bridge, and they could work towards that through the detailed design.
So within the costings given?
Within those costings, yes.
And the other factors around rails and so forth and footpaths, that could all be done
absolutely.
Because these are all important aspects
they
if
are.
we're making a decision today on the type of bridge. I wanted to clarification around the new bridge versus the new heritage bridge. Can you tell me more specifically about the new heritage bridge, the heritage part of it, please? Because some things are available to be used and some are not. So will it look the same as, but do I understand that it will look the same as the previous bridge but be structurally new?
So it would be,
strengthened.
it's on page 18 of the attachment, which, sorry, I need to check what page that is on the... is page
85? 18 is
85 down the bottom there. So similar appearance to the original bridge with a somewhat different structural system, which is that it would be steel, but it would be a suspension bridge. So in some ways it would be similar to the previous one.
So yes, and that's the bit that I really want clarity about. So structurally different, but it would look pretty similar. Okay.
Can Rhodes follow that up? Please, because it's an important part of the consideration. For the agricultural users, there's a real issue about the height of the parapets and the width. And if it looked like and was configured like the beautiful historic bridge, which we all know and loved, which is no more, it would not fulfil that purpose, because those larger, higher, wider bits of machinery would not be able to get between the pillars unless it was much, much wider. Is that not the case?
My understanding is that the new heritage would be wider but have a similar system. So it would look like that but be wide enough to take the 3.6, I think. That.
Yeah, like I'd again, and take your point, Councillor, that's something that we would have to work through with the design to ensure that it met the needs of the parties that were going to use it.
Councillor Gary, sorry to have interrupted you.
Well, actually, it was very helpful because, in fact, that was what I was getting at. I needed clarity around those points before I decide to vote. One thing that hasn't been covered, and I wondered if you were aware of, or the writers of the report were aware of. At the weekend, I was watching a rerun of a documentary called Nancy Wake, The White Mouse. It's about a New Zealand woman who was in the French Resistance, and you might wonder what the hell it's got to do with Sutton Bridge. But I noticed towards the end, and it was clearly filmed locally, inland Otago, guess which bridge it appeared to be? The Sutton Bridge that was used for the filming. And it just, in all of the conversations and even in the submissions today, I mean, I certainly heard some things that the mail run, the prescriptions and things I hadn't been aware of before, but the film aspect, and we know how big that is in terms of our economic development, was clearly important in terms of that. Is that something you were aware of, Richard?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Hawkins?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. And it's again a question around the two staff recommended options, not the multitude of recommended options from Opus. But the decision, the difference between them is essentially aesthetics, in that one is a utilitarian option, or is being priced up as a utilitarian option, and the other one is something that's designed sympathetic to the original.
That's correct.
Right. But bearing in mind that council don't make utilitarian above ground infrastructure anymore due to other policies that we have around incorporating art and design into infrastructure, we wouldn't go down that path anyway. So that the new bridge option would also be something that is...
it would still need to look at ways of making it as sympathetic to the environment, and looking at other ways of incorporating some of the salvaged material, such as the stone, which might be by way, or could, I don't know, plaque or something. So that would obviously be part of any process, is ensuring that it was as fit for purpose as it could be, and then we could always look at other options for reuse of salvaged stone to recognise the previous structure that was there.
And all of that can be done as part of the new bridge option?
Yes, it would be part of the project.
Any further questions? Councillor Van der Vis?
Picking up on Councillor Gary's question, there's a really big difference between a bridge that's rated for 20 tonnes and a bridge that's rated for 50. I note also that in item 7 on page 58, there's a mention of 19 million kilograms. Just cross the last 3 zeros off that. That's obviously a typo. Unless you're going to fill the whole thing in and reroute the Tyree. So, given that we don't have clarity over whether or not we're going to get a 20-tonne or a 50-tonne weight limit bridge, given also the suggestion that if it is just a 20-tonne bridge, that there may be the occasional 50-tonne truck goes across it anyway, how can we really make a decision based on the options in front of us without knowing what kind of bridge we're talking about? Because a 20 or a 50-tonne bridge are vastly different animals.
So one way would be that we could take this process further down the path, and including some consultation and report back for a decision. That would be one option. Another part of that discussion will involve a further discussion with NZTA around the like-for-like replacement. So flood recovery work, which they are funding this as, is supposed to be putting back what was there. We're obviously looking, if we were going for 50 tonne, to improve what was there, and we would have to just run that past them as well. But ultimately the information we've got as far as the design team goes is, because it is a new structure, they can build it to whatever.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I'd like to foreshadow that all right. Richard's suggestion just now that we may be able to get more information after we talk with NZTA about the weight issue limit. I would very much like to have that information before we make a decision. But I have some other issues as well. The original bridge that was there, Richard, did it service adequately, do you think, the road structure and the number of people that were using it? I think it's 70 movements a day. The original bridge.
Sorry, Councillor, did it service that? Was it fit for purpose?
Yes.
Look, the information we've had back from the community board and community is that it was.
Okay, and is it also...
But, sorry, if I can just finish that answer. It was sufficient when prior to the weight limit of 5 tonne being placed on it, at which time it was not fit for purpose, which is why the work was done to bring it back up to 20 tonne.
Right, and is it not also true that once it was back up to 20 tonne, that the reason that the bridge failed was because it had a whole load of scaffolding hanging off it that hooked up with a whole lot of debris coming down the stream, and that had that scaffolding been removed in time, the bridge would still be there?
No, that wasn't the findings post the flood event. The hot volume of the water and potentially the amount of debris that did come down the river because of the high water levels were the reason for the bridge failure. And while the scaffolding was in place on the bridge, it was not identified as the reason for the failure.
So are you saying that the debris actually impacted the bridge directly and not just the scaffolding hanging off it?
A combination of both.
Interesting. Okay, thank you.
Councillor O'Malley.
My questions are really around some NZTA endpoints as it relates to getting funding and stuff. The business case ratio, right, of BCR, how big is it going to be on this bridge? Because there's not a lot of traffic movements.
So it's not relevant for the flood recovery work, but it gave us an indication so we could have that conversation with them. But we don't have to complete a business case for the BCR for this recovery work.
Okay, so that allows us then to build a 50-tonne bridge?
We would need to go back and just ensure that NZTA were comfortable with that, but they haven't raised a flag over anything at this stage.
Mm-hmm. And then just sort of from something I've seen with the Otago Southland Transport Committee is the Pyramid Bridge at Matara, which is a single lane bridge but is actually a wider span bridge to deal with. There has been some design characteristics put into that bridge to deal with agricultural equipment. Are you familiar with that much at all?
No, but again, the consultants who do bridges generally do them all over the country, so I'm sure they'll be familiar with them.
Well, and that's also one that's come to a resolution with the local community down there, so I think something worth thinking about as we go forward. Between the new heritage bridge and the new bridge, it's about $600,000 spent. Is that basically the aesthetics to do that?
Oh, look, I don't know the breakdown to come up with the figure, but I
imagine that's what it is. Cool. Thanks.
Councillor Hawkins.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. And my question is around NZTA as well, just given the suggestion that's been made around possibly deferring a decision on this until we get better information or more information. Comment was made in the public forum that to access NZTA funding, the project needed to be started in this financial year. Is that the case, or was
No, we've been regularly in contact. This was the one item post July 2017 flood that we'd specifically flagged with NZTA we may not be underway within that 12-month period to ensure they had a level of comfort, and they do know we're progressing it and that we've done a review, and they're comfortable if it does commence after, but obviously we're still very keen to get moving.
Thank you. Councillor Van Divis.
Given that we go today for any of these options, my hope is that we get more information first, but given that we do that, are we guaranteed of getting 70% NZTA funding for any of these options?
We would be 76% of either of the options, and the only flag I'd put there is I would like to go back and confirm absolutely around the increase from 20 tonne to 50 tonne,
Yes.
which we could do as part of that process.
Right, so if we were to make a decision today based on the options in front of us, and you then go to NZTA and confirm the 76% funding, if at that point NZTA decide that, well, actually, no, they're not that keen on spending quite that much, what would then be the process?
So we would report back here to update on what the council's contribution to the overall project would need to be and seek a decision whether that was acceptable to the council.
So it could end up being more than
it could be more than 24% of the total project cost,
right.
Potentially.
And would we at that point then have the option of reducing our hope for a 50 tonne to a 20 tonne limit? Or would that basically mean going against whatever decision we make
no,
today?
that decision could be made at any time.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Elder, but before you do that, I'm just going to ask one question for you. I hope you can answer it, Richard. Just for clarity for everyone's peace of mind around here and understanding what a 20 tonne difference to a 50 tonne difference is, a truck and trailer of a truck only of silage, and I'm thinking Councillor Lord may answer this otherwise. What is a truckload of, say, silage generally?
Not very much, but a truck and trailer load of cattle, a full-weighted truck and trailer load of cattle is about 46 tonne.
Okay, so that's just, and I want people to be aware of that's the sort of difference we're talking about. So it'd be two truck movements one truck movement itself wouldn't necessarily be able to get over here if it was stock. Yeah. Yeah. So, sorry, thank you. Councillor Elder.
My question was just answered, so.
Gary?
Yeah, I had a subsequent question. So just taking up on that point, Richard, can you, and maybe somebody else answers this, if we take that point about the truck and trailer being 46 tonne, what happened, what was expected to happen with the 20 tonne upgrade? Would that have been single trucks? Just a truck with the right, so this is more efficient, yeah. Okay, my question is around delay and the impact of that, and look, I'm really mindful of listening to the public forum this morning, and it reminds me of the high road and the two-car slip and just the impact that had, this huge impact on a small rural community. And while it isn't necessarily numbers, and I've heard people sort of talk about the vehicle movements, I don't think we should underestimate the effect. So what I want to know is, if we delay this decision to get that clarification, what is going to be the impact on the timing of beginning it? Is starting the project? Because I heard that as being a pivotal thing for the community.
Look, at this stage, our plan would have been, and this would be subject to discussions with the designers and then the tender process, but it would have been to complete discussions with users and communities and then do the design over the sort of winter period, tender and try and get it constructed over summer when the weather's better and the river levels are lower, so it's much more conducive to that type of construction. The longer we delay, I guess there is a risk there it pushes through next winter.
So is it possible to get that information and adhere to that timetable?
I can't answer that, Councillor, sorry. We would do our best to progress it as quick as we could, but I couldn't.
Understand.
Yep.
Councillor Hall, you had a question? I think you had your hand up, sorry.
With just something you were discussing before, the weight of a truck. The weight of a truck on its own is 26 tonne, not 20.
With?
No trailer, just truck.
Sorry, truck with what?
Loaded truck.
Thank you. depending on what it's loaded with. Okay, Councillor O'Malley, you have a hand up? Sorry, Councillor Lord.
Yeah, look, I just had a question, just in case anyone's thinking that this is not a good idea. Do you think that the indication from NZTA about their level of funding, is that an indication that the project is worth doing? And
I think probably the feedback we received from the community board is a better indication, and the position of NZTA is that it was infrastructure that was there before the flood. It is now no longer there, so they are happy to fund a project to replace it to get that level of service back for the community, and we have been told by the community that that is a level of service that they are very keen to have back because it does have an impact on them. So those two things together would tell me that it is a project worth pursuing.
Mr Saunders, for me, questions. Given that the community board, the community itself couldn't talk to the community because it didn't know of this report because it was dealt and confidential. So no one other than the landowners have really had the opportunity to come to talk to any group about heritage. And not taking away at all from how important the landowners who are affected by the bridge, there are probably some people in our community, in the Strathtyre community, who value the heritage aspects more than potentially the functionality. Given that, and I appreciate there's a foreshadowed motion, but I just wonder if a motion was put that asked the staff to pursue options for bridge design that provides access as quickly as possible for 50-tonne vehicles with a width of 3.6 metres was what was suggested with the footpath additionally. No, I'm not asking to motion. I'm just whether this would delay, whether it would allow you to continue to do the design work to get ready for. I'm trying to get you to a position that can get you in the best position for doing this bridge in your desired time period, and community consultation on heritage aspects of the bridge. Would that get you further forward than us delaying for more information?
Look, I think even if more information was sought, we would continue anyway. I think we need to. We know we need to do some consultation. This was more around seeking support that the council was happy to contribute its portion of the funding, and it just and obviously there is a design component to that level of funding. But in order for us to then proceed, there is a conversation we need to have with the community to make sure we get fit for purpose infrastructure. It's more around the commitment to DCC's portion of the rebuild than it is around the.
Thank you. So, Councillor Benson-Pope, you'd foreshadowed that is the end of the questions.
Well, it might be helpful if I move something so
yep.
we know what we're talking about.
Yep.
I've got no issue with some clarity, Madam Chair, around the optimal or achievable loading. And I'd certainly want to see consultation happening with the local community and TA about their respective inputs. And I'd want to see a bridge appropriate to the prime use of the area constructed, which the current, the formerly demised beautiful one wasn't. But so I'll move, and I equally think it's highly undesirable to have any further delay or to unnecessarily complicate the issue. So I'll move that the council choose a new bridge construction as its preferred option and ask staff to consult with NZTA and the local community about the elements that have been raised, namely the desirable or achievable loading, obviously with the community with the specifications so that there isn't any issue with parapets or abutments or whatever else, and TA and respective funding. And before final go-ahead, report further for approval, report to council for final approval. So that clearly, for those of you who know the area or know the area, it was an extraordinarily beautiful bridge, what was there. And I didn't know about the Nancy Wake connection, but that is even more special. The idea of a new heritage bridge is a weird nonsense to me. A replica bridge might be a more appropriate term, but if it's going to be wider so that some of the agricultural machinery can get through it, well, it's not going to look like what it did. And while I would hope that whatever whatever can be recovered and used to decorate or commemorate, and we do have a policy on art and architecture and infrastructure after all, which is being slavishly followed by staff in the future. But when you look at the options and the need and the extraordinary inconvenience that not many, but a number of local residents have had to put up with as a result of that flood damage, we need to get on with this. So I think this motion allows us to do that. It allows those questions that are still hanging in the air to be reported on before anyone starts on the expensive design or pouring concrete or changing the abutments or whatever else. And it's also significantly cheaper and faster than any of the other options available. So it seems to me that with the qualifications that I've added, it's an absolute no-brainer that we should get on with sooner rather than later.
That was an interesting talking to your motion without it being seconded, but thank you. So I just want to make sure I've got a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Newell. You wrote that down? You've written it? I was listening to the chair, so typing. Just, it is coming. I'm glad we had a break. I'm sure we could call an infrastructure services meeting just for that purpose. It is of merit. Councillor Benson-Pope, this is your motion. I presume at the start it's council support, or we know. Is this this has to go to council or not? This part. Yeah. Yeah, we can message whether it's a recommendation to council or it's a. Yeah. Okay. Can I just ask a question of the mover, whether design includes heritage aspects? Does design include heritage aspects?
Design includes being mindful of council policy. Yes, it does.
No, or
I don't think you need to say it, but have the assurance we know we've got a policy on the books about art and creativity.
Well, no, in light of the Community Board recommendation, which was heritage, and incorporating part of the heritage into it, that's why I'm asking whether that's the bit or whether that requires separate consultation.
Well, I'm trying to craft something that actually doesn't introduce delay as a matter of course, and I think getting on with it. We've got a policy, Madam Chair, which is mindful of design, and it may be that that design could be part of the heritage elements for reuse. I don't think it's a big issue.
Agreed. The heritage elements will be covered in the design, be they on the bridge or part of the project to acknowledge the heritage.
I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you. Okay, sorry, did you have another question? Sorry, another. Yep, but it was just questions. You asked a question of the motion, which was, thank you. And I'm now following up with another. Thank you. Councillor Vandervis? Are we in debate? In debate, yes.
Yeah.
Well, it's for and heritage value after design, and it doesn't inhibit anything, but it remembers that there's a heritage component in the design.
It's up to the mover.
Well, what's been suggested?
After design, put and heritage value.
Well, the design alludes to heritage amendment.
And seconded? Okay. Inclusive regarding the design and heritage of the bridge. If it's a new bridge, it's hardly heritage, but that's okay. And heritage values of the bridge. Yeah. Okay, sorry. Thank you for your patience, Councillor Van der Vis. You're talking to the motion.
Thank you.
Oh.
I understand the intent, but I'm not sure it means anything. I mean, a new bridge, however it's designed, is not going to have heritage values. It might mirror previous heritage values, it might incorporate materials, and Mr. Saunders has just given us, before that was introduced, just given us absolute assurance, which is limited, that will all be part of what he reports on.
Sorry, apologies. I had thought that you were happy with that change. You're not as the mover, and therefore I will have it taken out, because I'm sorry. I thought you'd said, yes, that's fine. Apologies. Thank goodness we did 2.1C. Now, that is moved and seconded. Now into debate. Councillor Van der Vis, thank you for your patience.
I'm somewhat surprised that Councillor Benson Pope feels that it's not possible to design a new heritage-style bridge. To me, we have two choices here. One of them is a suspension bridge, which may use the original rock pillars, which I think were certainly a very charming feature of the old bridge. A suspension bridge, to me, is a much older, much more aesthetically pleasing, and I think looking to the future, a bridge that will be seen as more reflective of the heritage of the area. And so for that reason I'm surprised that the original option 1 on our order paper, which is for construction of a new heritage bridge, is not being favoured. You could add the word heritage style bridge if you were wanting to be pedantic about it actually not being heritage because it's new. But certainly the style of the bridge proposed under option 1, I think, is something which would have met everybody's requirements to some degree. All different users of the bridge, be those bikers on the heritage trail, be those 50-tonne trucks, whatever, would all basically, I think, be catered for with our original option 1 of a new heritage style bridge. Certainly Richard would have to go away and check to see that if it was going to carry 50 tonnes, that NZTA would still stump 76% of it, and I'm quite happy for that to be a rider. But if we want to reflect everybody's interest in this bridge, then a suspension bridge over and above a new steel box that just spans the water, designed by an accountant, I think really doesn't quite do the trick. The recommended option of the new heritage style bridge is not significantly more expensive, as I understand it. Being a suspension bridge, it also has the advantage of having its support elements above the level that the truck carries the goods on, and this allows the run-up to the bridge not to be so high, so there's actually a cost saving in having a suspension style bridge. And I suspect that the reason the original bridge was there and made in suspension style was for that reason as well. It gives more freeboard for the river to go into flood mode without actually affecting the bridge. So given that we have essentially a choice now, as it seems, between a bridge that is purely utilitarian and is going to conform to the motion we have in front of us, or a bridge that is not much more expensive but would actually reflect some of the heritage history and is, after all, the staff recommended option. I would like to foreshadow that if this motion fails, that I move the recommended option, construction of a new heritage-style bridge, as a bridge that would keep all interested parties, I believe, happy. From the people that want to get a 50-tonne truck across to the people that really do like the idea of a suspension bridge, simply because it's a beautiful thing, and that's what we always used to have there. Thank you.
Councillor Hall?
The bridge for weight carrying will need to be higher than 50 tonne, because the road legal cartage is now 58 tonne on truck and trailer. It's a road legal heavy design, so it can be the bridge capable of carrying class 1 traffic.
Thank you. Councillor Elder, I had you down. No, or had I? No, sorry. Councillor Hawkins. I got you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not an engineer, nor do I pretend to be one, but I do want to offer some comfort to Councillor Van der Vis' concerns. The motion that is being proposed has been characterised as supporting a steel box utilitarian structure rather than an option that would reflect the aesthetic and the historic nature of its predecessor in that spot. But that, we've been told, won't be the case, both by way of council policy, and that we have a policy that says we don't make Eastern European utilitarian above ground infrastructure anymore.
It's culturally insensitive of you.
But would you prefer Balkan? And also have had an explicit undertaking from staff involved in the project that this option will incorporate, where possible, the remnants of its predecessor in terms of giving effect to our policy around art and creativity and design. This isn't supporting a utilitarian steel box option designed by accountants, and I think, and hopefully, by saying it twice more, we can give comfort to people who see that as such, because, and I have confidence in staff to deliver on council policy as this work progresses, ultimately being reported back to council or a standing committee prior to a final decision being made. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Gary.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I find myself agreeing with Councillor Van der Vis around the recommended option, and I note the wording says the design will be in keeping with the historic bridge while still delivering the structural integrity for heavy vehicle capacity. I'd feel a lot more comfortable if the motion we're considering had included the heritage value wording or some such thing, because in the community my understanding is that that heritage element is paramount, of course, besides the functionality which we heard about today. I always remember reading somewhere that the Chinese symbol for crisis is also opportunity, and here we have an opportunity to improve the capacity of the bridge for the rural community that it serves. And it's a chance for us to signal to our rural community within our city boundary, even if it isn't a large rural community, that we are listening to what they are asking. We've heard that the delay is, not having delay is paramount, and so if I vote for this motion with the assurances that we've been given around heritage, then I'll be doing so to ensure there is no further delay, because I believe that timing is important. And I'll put my trust in the consultation with the local community. around the heritage values. But given what I noted on the documentary and how beautiful the bridge looked, and obviously with film locations, I mean, it's just one small point, but I listened very carefully to those other aspects of community life. The heritage loop, the visitor aspect, not being possible at the moment, the stock use, the mail run, and the use for prescriptions and ambulances, that is a really important point for our rural community, and the school bus. There's so many aspects to this. It's not necessarily about the number of vehicle movements, it's about the community life. So, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor O'Malley.
Thank you. I think when we consider these kind of investments, I brought up the BCR option and thought, because people often go, well, how many cars are crossing that bridge? But I think when you look at a rural spend versus city spend, you've got to understand what the effect is on the percentage of that community, which low population means a small number of farms, but for those people that effect is enormous. Farms pay a very high rate on their rates. They individually pay a fair amount of money in, and I've heard Councillor Lord say he doesn't mind because it's going into the general pool of the city. And I think as a city we've got to look back out into our area, we've got to look out into our rural sections and say sometimes we've got to make a spend that we wouldn't make in the city but makes sense for the rural area, and I think this is one of those spends. I'm disappointed that the heritage has come out of this, because although I have a lot of faith in staff, you can't guarantee. I mean, have we ever never seen it? Can we guarantee that we've never seen a situation where a word has been omitted and later on we wish it had been in there because we haven't seen it come out at the end? I only wanted that in there to make sure that we captured the heritage component, and I'm sorry that it didn't meet the standards of English that was necessary to make everybody happy. You know, maybe we should have used an architectural bridge, because then we would have been able to say what we wanted, and we wouldn't have had to worry about whether heritage would refer to only a new or an old bridge. As I pointed out to Ms Mash, if we'd used antique bridge, we would have definitely been oxymoronic. But heritage, it's hard to say. I mean, can you do a reproduction? So I think we got caught in semantics here, and now we're going for option number 2. I'm ambivalent. I think I'll vote against this one because I would have liked option number 1. I want the bridge built. If it passes, and I'll be looking for a heritage bridge. If it doesn't pass, we'll go for option number 1.
Any other speakers? I will speak to this motion. I equally share the disappointment that the words heritage aren't put in there, but I also accept the assurances of staff that that will be part of the components. It will take a long time before I forget the 17th of July last year when we saw the 15th of July 17, when we first saw the bridge come down. It was a huge loss to the community. It cannot be rebuilt as it is. In fact, I think the part of this report that I think was very well written up was the nature of the parts or the components that cannot be reused. And I was there with Heritage New Zealand when they talked about the woven straps, which are unique to that bridge. The bridge itself was older than the O'Connell Bridge. So significance-wise, it cannot be rebuilt as it was. And I'm mindful of that. And oddly, it's a pity that the city hadn't noted the bridge as a heritage bridge in the past, and maybe we wouldn't be quite having this debate now. It hadn't been valued to that extent to have got onto the heritage listing. I'm going to accept this motion because I think all intents and purposes is to get good design into the bridge, and I'm mindful that the pillars, which if you made them broader, would be less significant, and you wouldn't necessarily be able to make them higher. And I don't want a report to have to come back and ask us to get rid of the heritage values and slow down this process because of us putting in the heritage there and not giving the guide to the staff that get good design, get the results, provide for a wider bridge, one that's going to take heavier trucks and do all these other things, and that is impossible. So to that extent, and I think it is semantics to a certain extent that we're arguing about today, I think I will be supporting this motion in the belief that staff will come back with the best design, but it also leaves to the community a discussion to have about how their heritage is remembered. And it may not be on that site, or it may be somewhere else. And that is also provided in this motion and without constraining the staff. And for that reason, I'll be supporting it. Do you wish to exercise your right of reply, Councillor Benson-Pope?
Briefly, thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to thank councillors for their comments and the correction of the misrepresentation that came from across the table. I think it will be our expectation that we end up...
Point of order. Would the councillor like to enlarge on what misrepresentation?
Yeah, I meant
and from across the table specify?
Certainly. I meant the inaccurate comments that you made about utilitarian boxes, given the discussion and the designs before us. And Councillor Hawkins more than adequately put that to rest.
Can I rule on this point of order, please? A point of order, I think, for misrepresentation is generally a matter of fact rather than opinion, and I'm going to... I don't know that there's a rule. I think there's just opinions here that of debate, so I'm not sure that there's a point of order for fact to be set. Can I just take some advice on that? I'm just going to do that. But the point of order being sought was a misrepresentation. Is that correct, Councillor van der Vis?
Yes.
So 25.2 is misrepresentation of any statement made by a member or by an officer or council employee. So you're saying that he's misrepresenting you talking about the accountants designing the bridge, or?
Councillor Benson-Pope has claimed, with innuendo and without being specific, but quite obviously, that I have misrepresented something in what I have said. Yep. That is plainly not the case.
That's right.
You can give me the rule, but not the ruling. The ruling, I'm finding it very difficult because I'm not sure that the bridge that you designed was the bridge that this motion refers to. And
there has been a lack of clarity over whether we're going to get a suspension bridge, i.e. something that at least gives a nod to the heritage bridge that was there, or whether we're going to get a steel box, which is what is detailed in the report.
Okay, I'm going to rule
Hence,
that it isn't a misrepresentation, because what was clearly alluded to was that there'll be design criteria around it, and it's got the word design in there, and it has to come back to be suitable design. To that end, it isn't a misrepresentation, that it's not going to be a square box.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And if I could continue then, and we also have clear policy on the Council's books about incorporating design and art into infrastructural construction of all kind, minor and major, as this is.
If it's not going to be a square box, could we know what it is possibly going to be?
The motion covers that.
I thought I'm in my right of reply again, am I not? What's more, strange it might seem to councillors, given my involvement with the Heritage Fund and statements indeed I've made recently about heritage being ignored in the central city, it seems to me even from the meandering report that I've already criticised, that given the comments, given the extraordinary delay actually in reinstating this bridge since the flood, and given the clear pressure that has been alluded to by a number of councillors on a small but significant and important part of our Dunedin community, we need to get on with it. And what we have here is a clear commitment. Mr Saunders has given it in the minutes. It's been mentioned several times. The community is going to be consulted about the design of the bridge, and if the community board is as concerned as they appear to be about incorporating elements that reflect or mirror or use tell the narrative of the bridge, then that is clearly going to happen, as Mr Saunders has undertaken. The swinger for me is the speed. This doesn't require any further delay. It should enable Mr Saunders to talk to TA about the funding levels and resolve this issue about the loading, to talk to the council about what they actually want and get some finite nature of what can be used and incorporated in the design, perhaps some of the elements of the former bridge. I would assume that interpretation at the site will be part of what happens, because it's important that the images that do exist of that bridge are not lost, and that would be a wonderful way of giving a nod to what was there in the past. But I think we should get on with it, and I think this motion enables us to do that, so that they can have their bridge sooner rather than later, and it should be an elegant, appropriate bridge that reflects where we've been, but actually meets the needs of that community in its function.
Thank you, and I'll put the vote. Sorry, have we got clarity around whether it's a recommendation or a to council?
It's a decision of this
Okay,
committee.
thank you.
Can we have a division, please?
Division.
Aye.
Councillor Elder? Aye. Councillor Gary?
Aye.
Councillor Hall? Aye. Councillor Hawkins?
Aye.
Councillor Lord?
Aye.
11 months, thank you. That takes us to the end of the session. It's number 11, items for consideration by the Chair. Any other? Thank you. Saunders. That is no matters. Thank you for your attention today.